Hi everybody, my name is Sally. You are back at Sally Says. Hello, how you doing? I hope everybody is having a really nice weekend. It's a bit of a different video today. I am going to be talking about my debt situation, my debt story, how I've gotten to the point where I am now, where I got help and advice for my situation. Now, I want to preface this very clearly by saying that this is information, this is my story, this is what I did and the steps that I took. Debt is one of these things that is very different for each person and it's very particular to each person. If you are worried about debt, I would strongly recommend that you reach out to the organizations that are there to help you with this situation. Please don't take anything here in this video as anything more than, as I say, my story and what's happened to me. Also, I want to obviously make it clear that I'm in the UK. Different countries are going to have different processes and organisations to help you with debt. So, unfortunately, I'm not in a position to offer any information about how they do things in other countries. This is simply how it's worked for me here in the UK. So, with all that said, let's get started. So my current debt is £13,317. That is not including my student debt. I do have some student debt from university. I'm not including that in this because it is not currently a consideration in terms of how I'm dealing with my debt. In the UK, our student loan system is that you only start paying back your student loans once your salary is over a certain amount. I don't have anywhere near that amount of income coming in. I'm very significantly under the threshold, unfortunately. So it's not something that I'm worried about at this time. So discounting student debt, my total debt is £13,317, which is terrifying. Yeah. So let's break down what that is actually made of, that big 13,000 number. It's made of several different parts, and I've broken it down like this because this is the way that I think about it when I think about my debt. The by far and largest portion of it is CCJs. CCJs are, if you don't know, if you're not in the UK and your system is different, they're county court judgments. You get a county court judgment if you do what I did, which is stick your head in the sand through reasons that I'll get into a bit later in the video, and don't deal with your debt. If you don't deal with the letters that come through the door in huge numbers, if you don't tackle your debt for a significant amount of time, they will eventually, in all likelihood, end up in you receiving a county court judgment, which incredibly complicates your future financial health. If you ever want to get a mortgage, you're going to find it very difficult with a CCJ, let alone 4 CCJs, which I'm fairly sure what I have. You're going to find it very hard to get any kind of credit whatsoever. The good thing, good is not the right word, something to consider with CCJs and debt in general is, at least in this country, in the UK, it's not forever. If you mess up and you get yourself into a situation like I did, it's really important to, yes, sort it out, figure it out, find out what you can do to best look after yourself when it comes to debt and your future self as well. But I think it's also really important to forgive yourself and to remember that this is not your life. It's 6 years of your life, which is a very long time. The CCJ will affect your life for 6 years. But it's done. After 6 years, it's done, it's gone, you can move on. And that's whether you've paid it or not. So if you have a CCJ, if you have multiple CCJs, I understand that it can be incredibly depressing because you feel like these difficulties that you have, nobody gets into any amount of debt without there being other issues at play. So be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself. Yes, a CCJ is going to have large, far-reaching significance for those 6 years, but then they're done. So the way that I approached my CCJs was, well, actually, let's stop there and we'll come to CCJs down the road. So my CCJs, actually, I don't think about very much because there's nothing that I can do about them. There's nothing that I can do about the CCJs because I don't have the money to pay them off. Once your debt becomes a CCJ, unless you can pay it off in one fell swoop, there's a limited amount that you can do about it, especially if you're in the situation I'm in, and we'll go into that in more detail. So yes, my CCJs take up a huge percentage of my debt, but it's also the part of my debt that I don't really think very much about because I can't do anything about it. And as I say, I will explain why that is the case later on. Loans. Now, the loans section includes things like catalogues, home shopping, and that is the second largest portion of my debt. I racked up a huge amount of debt with home shopping, catalogues. I was in, and again, I'm going to explain this in the next section, but I was in well-paid full-time employment, and my credit limit with these home shopping companies just went up and up and up and up. I shopped and shopped and shopped and shopped, and that is how we got into the situation where we are now, where I have over $4,000 of home shopping debt. The next big one is utilities. These are mainly my current electricity debt, and it's a previous utility debt. I currently owe £546 on an old bank account that is now closed with Santander, and credit cards I owe some money on as well. So that's the breakdown of my debt. So how on earth did I get myself into such a pickle? Let's talk about it. Up until about 6 years ago, I was working as a self-employed graphic designer, creating small businesses generally with logos and other graphic design services. It got really difficult to keep that going and bring in sufficient income to cover my expenses. So I got to the point where I decided that I would go back into the 9-to-5 rat race. I would find a salaried 9-to-5 job working for someone else. I didn't want to have to do that, but that was the situation that I was in. I needed to pay my bills, and so there we had it. I at the time thought that I was very lucky in that reasonably quickly I found a really well-paid position with a local small company as a marketing and community manager. Really excited about the role, started the role and really enjoyed it. Thought that everything was was great. I worked really hard and saw significant improvements in their social media communities. I was also managing their forums, and we saw some really good improvements in terms of the interactivity of people on the forums, and thought that I was doing my job fine. Apparently not, though, because 6 months later I was made redundant, a week short of the end of my probationary period. So yeah, that was a thing. It really came out of the blue. As I say, I'd had no feedback from any managerial staff that I wasn't hitting the things that I needed to be hitting in terms of quotas or targets. I hadn't been given any kind of warnings that things weren't going well. I felt completely blindsided by this redundancy. And quite frankly, it triggered a huge downward spiral into depression. I was incredibly depressed because I didn't know what to do. I had spent, and it's completely indicative of a lifelong habit of being crap with money. Really crap with money. It's always been the case, whether I've been in well-paid work, self-employed, receiving benefits. I'm rubbish. Absolutely rubbish. There are lots of things in my life that I'm very good at. There are lots of skills and talents that I have, as we all do. Managing my money has never been one of them. And I think one of the reasons for that is that I was in care. I was in foster care from the age of 12 to leaving care at 18. And I don't think that, look, I'm not blaming anyone because I think it's just inherently part of my personality that I'm rubbish with money, but I also didn't have anyone to really teach me how money worked. I didn't have anyone to teach me how to budget or the value of money. And so it has always been like rain through my hands. It never stays. Money has never stayed in my hands when I've received it. I've just always spent it. And it's almost like I don't really know how to describe it, but it's almost like a compulsion that I have to get rid of it as soon as I have it, and I don't know what that's about. I don't know how that relates to my past, but that's how. So when I step back to look at the situation objectively, that's how it feels. It feels like there's some part of me that doesn't maybe believe that I am worth money, and I don't know. I don't know what it is, but the fact is, when I have historically received money, I've spent money. I've never had anything in terms of savings, or I've always lived paycheck to paycheck, whether that's working for someone else or benefits, or, as I say, being self-employed. And I've lived paycheck to paycheck down to the last pennies. I will historically have gotten to payday with nothing in my bank account. Pennies, maybe. So it's always been a problem. And when I was in that period of employment, it was the best paid employment that I'd had in a very long time, if not ever. And I was able to buy things that I'd never been able to buy before. I was able to buy myself nice new clothes every month if I wanted to. I was able to buy all the makeup that I wanted to. I was able to buy furniture for my home. And part of me felt like that was that I was owed that I owed myself these nice things. And I'd spent so long scrimping and saving on benefits. I'd spent so long on a low income. There was certainly part of me that felt like I deserve these things. And that was all well and good until I didn't have that income anymore. So I very quickly got to a point where I started to receive letters about payments. I couldn't meet my minimum payments. I had home shopping accounts with a £4,000 credit limit. How could I possibly start paying that back when I wasn't even receiving benefits at that time because I hadn't started to receive them yet? It just felt like I was in a huge, huge hole that I had no hope of getting out of. And I didn't know where to start. So I did the same thing that I've done historically when faced with a situation where I don't feel like I'm in control of it. And that's I stuck my head in the sand. The letters kept coming. I didn't speak to anybody. I stopped picking the phone up. I just stopped talking to people. I completely stuck in my head in the sand. There's no other way of describing it. I was incredibly depressed, not just through the financial situation, but in general, losing the job and it coming out of nowhere as it did, became very depressed and didn't have anyone that I felt I could turn to for help. So the situation just escalated and escalated and escalated. I continued getting letters, which I either threw away without opening them or just left them lying around without opening them. As I say, I stopped picking the phone up because I was so terrified that it was going to be somebody asking me about payment. I just stopped. Or I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to deal with it because I didn't think I had any control over it. I didn't think there was anything I could do. And I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know who to ask for help from. I just stopped dealing with it completely. So that's how I found myself in this situation. And it wasn't just home shopping. I stopped paying my gas bill. I stopped paying my electricity bill. I stopped paying everything because I had no money. I had no money. So there was nothing that I felt that I could do about the situation. Unfortunately though, I didn't tell anybody this. I didn't tell the people that I owed money to that I was in the situation. So the letters just kept coming. What happens when you ignore letters about debt? What happens when you ignore letters about payments that you haven't made for months? In my case, I started getting bailiff visits. I think it was potentially one of the scariest. I've been through some scary situations in my life, but I think the bailiffs turning up was one of the scariest. And I think the reason that it was so scary is because it just compounded how little control I had over my life at that point. I didn't know what my rights were. I didn't know what was going to happen. Were they going to break in? Were they going to knock the door down and come and take my things away? Were they going to take my computer away? My computer at this time of my life, my access to the internet, was really the only thing keeping me afloat mentally. It was really the only thing. That contact with the outside world was my only contact with the outside world. I didn't have friends. My family didn't live nearby, and we had a difficult relationship. So the internet was the only thing, as I say, keeping me alive, honestly. So I was terrified that they were going to remove my computer and take that anchor, my only anchor, away from me. I didn't care about much else. It was my computer that I was most worried about losing. So it was a very scary situation. Luckily, I only had it happen a couple of times, and I understand that it could have been way more. It could have been way more times than that because of how much I owed to so many companies. But it was a couple of times that it happened. The first time I refused to even open the door and speak to them, so they ended up going around the back of my home at the time, which was a flat on the ground floor, and just stood outside my bedroom window until I opened it and spoke to them through my bedroom window. If you are in a situation where you have bailiffs knocking on your door, if you have a situation where you're worried that bailiffs may be knocking on your door, please don't deal with it by yourself. There are companies out there that can help you. There are organisations, charities out there, and you can make it stop. You can stop bailiffs, but it's really important that you do not let them in. Do not let them in. Once you've let them in once, they then have the right to come in again and again and again. Do not. If there's one thing you take away from this video, please let it be that you do not let bailiffs into your home. Ever. Ever. The only time that bailiffs can force their way into your property is for council tax, the non-payment of council tax. And then that is only if they've gone to court and they've followed a very lengthy process that you will know about. You will know if you've got the specific documentation that bailiffs need, and there'll be very specific bailiffs. As I say, I don't want to get into advising anybody in this video, but please reach out to the organisations that I'm going to talk about later in this video if you are at risk of or already receiving bailiff visits. So here I was talking to these very burly, gruff men through my bedroom window in floods of tears. I was in pyjamas or a nightie or something that I'd been wearing for days. It was a very depressing situation. I explained that I had mental health difficulties. I explained that I was currently under my GP with depression. They understandably, they are there for one purpose, and that is to get money from you. So they aren't going to take things at face value. So I had to show them my prescriptions. I had to show them my boxes of tablets. I luckily had letters from my hospital consultants explaining my medical and mental health diagnoses. I showed them all of this, and still they were very persistent about the situation. Eventually, they said that I would need to get all of this information to their head office, and need to do that within, I think they said something like 24 hours in order to stop them from coming back. I think that was really the catalyst for me beginning to deal with this situation, and it was a very, when I say dealing with this situation, it was the least that I could do. I don't want these men coming back. What is the least that I need to do to make that happen? And that was contact their company with the documentation that I'd shown them. And thank goodness that was enough, and I didn't hear anything from them. Again, they sent the debt back to the company that it had come from. So that was my primary experience with bailiffs. The second one actually wasn't anywhere near as traumatic because I was very aware of my rights at that time. I'd done a lot of research. This is when I was kind of starting on the journey to really getting a grasp on what I was going to do about my debt. I'd also done a lot of research into bailiffs, so I knew exactly what they could and couldn't do, and I think that was very empowering, and it was a much less traumatic experience. And I think just they know when somebody knows what they're talking about. They know when someone knows their rights, because they will push it. If they think that they can tell you something that will enable them to get into your property, they will push it. They really, really will. So please get advice from the organisations that I'm going to talk about later in the video. So yeah, bailiffs really were, as I say, the catalyst to me starting to tackle these problems. It wasn't simply a case of the bailiffs are here, I really need to sort my shit out. There were lots of situations that kind of came together that resulted in me feeling strong enough to begin to deal with the issue. I think the different parts that had to come together was that I was starting to feel a bit happier in things. I had just started a new relationship and I was feeling very positive about that. I was doing more creative work just sort of for fun. I had an Etsy store that I was really enjoying creating things for. Creativity for me has always been a huge deal. When I'm creative, I find that my mental health is generally stable and I'm happy and I'm doing okay. When I stop feeling the push to be creative, that is certainly for me one of the warning signs that I am about to enter a dark period, when I'm starting to go a bit downhill with depression and whatnot. So I was starting to feel a bit more positive, and I really wanted to start to take the situation in hand. But where do you start? Like, where do you start dealing with such for me, it felt like a huge situation. I was still just on benefits, I wasn't working, so I had a very limited income. And I knew vaguely that there were different remedies out there, but I had no clue where to start. I had received, as we had already discussed a little bit, I received hundreds of letters from creditors. And on a lot of those letters, they will give you the names of organisations that can help you if you are struggling with debt. So that is where I found the details for these organisations, namely StepChange, the National Debtline, and then down the road a bit I found the Citizens Advice Bureau, who I will talk about more in a bit. So let's talk about these organisations. They're different in a few different ways. Some are charities, some are set up by actual companies. three organisations that I'm going to talk about are all regulated in different ways. But again, please do your own research and see which ones are going to be best for you. Let's talk about these organisations in a bit more detail. StepChange. StepChange are not a charity. They are a company. I really appreciated StepChange. I think they have a really good system in place in that they potentially certainly more than National Debtline, again, in my experience. StepChange are more inclined to handhold you somewhat through the process. So if you're the kind of person that really doesn't know anything about debt remedies, doesn't know where to start, then they might be a good place to start. My advice, for what it's worth, is to talk to all of these organisations, and then through their advice and through your own research, figure out what you want to do. So StepChange are not a charity, they are a company. They are able to process debt relief orders, and we're going to talk about these remedies in more detail later. They are able to do that for you if you're eligible. They are authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. I've included all of the details for these organisations on the screen, so obviously feel free to pause and take that information down should you need to. National Debtline I really found very helpful because they have an amazing online assessment tool that you can do at any time, and it gives you a complete package of advice, and it will tell you exactly the correct debt remedy for you based on the information that you've given them. So I really recommend National Debtline, especially if you're someone like me that would rather not speak to anybody on the phone. Like, if I can do it on a website rather than call someone, then that's the way I want to do it. So if you're like me and not great with picking up the phone and speaking to people, then certainly have a try on the National Debtline assessment tool. They also have some web chat functionality, so if you'd rather just web chat with someone, you can do that as well. They can also process DROs for you if you're eligible, and they are a registered charity. So that's National Debtline. The next organisation that I want to talk about in a bit more detail is the Citizens Advice Bureau. The Citizens Advice Bureau are amazing. Completely amazing. Like, we are so lucky in this country to have this organisation. If you've ever had any issues with anything from a service that wasn't conducted correctly to like work on your house that went wrong, to debt issues, to benefit questions, to other money related issues, to questions about childcare, questions about divorcing or splitting up with your partner, housing, homelessness, you need to take a look at their website. They have a huge amount of information on debt remedies on their website, and I really recommend doing as much independent research as you can on the Citizens Advice Bureau website. I'm a little bit biased maybe to Citizens Advice Bureau in that I have worked with them. I was a volunteer gateway advisor with them for a reasonably short amount of time, but long enough to know that they're freaking amazing. I know from personal experience, being one of their gateway advisors, that their debt advisors are highly trained and they are certified to give debt advice. The training that Citizens Advice Bureau advisors and assessors go through is extensive. So you know that you're getting good advice. Their advice is guaranteed to be neutral, and it's also guaranteed to be in your best interests. When you are advising, assessing with the Citizens Advice Bureau, it's drummed into you that all advice has to be in the client's best interest, and there are very strict processes that Citizens Advice have in place to make sure that that is the case. They can also process DROs for you if you are eligible, and as I say, they are a registered charity. So if I was in the situation where I was a few years ago, where I was just starting to want to tackle my debt problem, I think Citizens Advice Bureau would actually be the first organisation that I'd reach out to. First of all, I would certainly make the most of the plethora of information that they have on the website. The reason that I'd recommend starting with Citizens Advice is because they can, especially if you're able to work with them in person, if you're able to get into your local Citizens Advice Bureau, they will actually have a debt advisor that works with them that you'll actually be able to speak with on an ongoing, regular basis. So it's like having a key worker, really, who can sort of see your case through from the start to the end. So if you're someone that wants to build a relationship with someone and get advice from the same person the entire way through the process, then I'd certainly recommend Citizens Advice. So you have started talking to some organisations about your debt, or you've started to do some research. I want to talk a little bit about the main debt remedies that we have in this country. If you are in Scotland, Wales, Ireland, or any other country, the remedies available to you will be different. So I can only speak to the processes that we have in this country. I'm not going to give any information about these because you really need to do your own research. I don't want to get into advising about remedies, but this is the terminology that you might hear through the process of looking at how best to deal with your debt. Bankruptcy, we've all heard of that, I'm sure. Debt management plans, debt relief order, individual voluntary arrangement, administration orders, payment plans, token payments, and debt write-off. So these are the main debt remedies that you're probably going to be hearing about as you start to look at best ways of dealing with your debt. What did I do? When I got that bailiff visit and when I decided to deal with my debt? How did I do that? The very first thing that I did was I obtained my full credit report from both Experian and Credit Karma. Credit Karma are TransUnion. Now Experian and TransUnion are different. Your credit report may well be different between these two organisations, so you need to make sure that you have your credit report from both organisations. Then I knew that I had CCJs. I knew that I'd had documentation from the court, so I needed to know what my CCJs were. So I used a company called Trust Online, which I had to pay, I think it was £6 to do a CCJ search. So I got that and got all the information about my CCJs. Once I had that information, once I had the two credit reports from Experian and TransUnion, and I had my full CCJ information, I compiled a spreadsheet of all my debt details. I included the name of the company, their main address, my account number, or as much of my account number as I had, because Credit Karma and on your credit report, you'll sometimes not be given your full account number, so I just put the information I had, the amount of the debt, and the date of my first default. That's important because any debts that are more than 6 years old shouldn't be on your credit report. So if you see your credit report has a debt and has a default of more than 6 years ago, you should absolutely follow the process to look at having that removed. Once I had all this information, I began to consider what options were available to me, and as I mentioned before, I spoke to StepChange, I used National Debtline's online assessment tool, and then later down the road I spoke to Citizens Advice Bureau. The very first contact that I then had with my creditors was I wrote to every single creditor I had. I used a template from the National Debtline website. I explained that I was seeking help with my debt from StepChange, National Debtline and Citizens Advice Bureau. I requested a full statement of my debt with them, and I also requested that my account with them be frozen for 30 days while I began this process. Once I had that information back from my creditors, I had a ton of statements back from them, and I then updated my spreadsheet with my full account numbers from the companies. So I had the full information at that point of where I was, and again I then had to consider from the updated information, were the remedies that I was initially talking about still relevant? Was I still eligible for these? After speaking to StepChange, after going through the online assessment tool with the National Debtline, it became clear that really the only remedy for me was to, one, initially ask for the debt to be written off, and two, if that wasn't accepted, offer a low £1 token monthly payment. The other remedies that I've gone through weren't available to me for various different reasons. I didn't have the £670 or whatever it is that you need to claim bankruptcy, which is crazy in my opinion. My debts were too high to be eligible for a DRO. I didn't have enough spare income to do a debt management plan. For one reason or another, none of these remedies I was eligible for. The only thing I could do was do this £1 token payment offer. So that's what I did. I wrote again to all my creditors, explaining the circumstances behind the debt. I explained that it was due to my mental health problems. I explained that I had been made redundant and that it had triggered a long period of depression. I had a supporting statement from my GP, which I sent along with evidence of receiving my universal credit, receiving benefits. I explained in this letter that it was very unlikely that my financial situation would be improving. I had no idea of when or even if I would go back into employment. I thought it was very unlikely to happen anytime soon, and I made this very clear to them. With that information, I then requested that the debt be written off, and I asked if that wasn't possible. That I explained that I was able to offer a £1 monthly token payment. And then, of course, I sent that all off to the individual. I want to talk about utility debt a little bit. I, by far, had the most of my debt to utility companies. Utility companies in the UK, so your gas company, your electric company, your water company, they all work with organisations that provide grants to essentially clear that debt. And if it can't be cleared completely, you might find that it at least can be cleared significantly. I had my entire debt with npower paid off via a grant that was over £2,000, and I had half of my debt with Scottish Power cleared, which again was, I think, almost £2,000. I still do have over £2,000 owed to Scottish Power, but a huge amount obviously was written off. So when you speak to whichever organisation you're speaking to, make sure you let them know if you have utility debt, and they will be able to point you in the right direction of where to apply to have a grant to write that debt off, or at least clear a significant portion of it. You can also speak to the utility providers themselves, explain your situation if you have depression or mental health problems or whatever the reason is that the debt has happened. Speak to them, explain that to them, ask them what your options are. So I wrote to my creditors, what happened next? Well, I think I was quite lucky in that we've gotten to a point now where companies, certainly in the UK, have to tread very carefully with people with mental health problems. There is certainly regulation in place to protect vulnerable people, and there's only specific action that they have to them when dealing with people with mental health problems. So several of my debts were written off, and the rest agreed to the £1 token payment. Apart from, the only exception to that was a debt that I have that has been passed on to the PRA group, and the lowest that PRA group would accept was £5 a month. So I was able to agree to that. Talking about long-term plans when it comes to my debt, it's very difficult because I am still in a situation where I am on benefits. I do have a small additional income on top of my universal credit, but it is very small. So I'm very much still in a similar situation to the one that I was in when I first started dealing with these debts. I do at some point need to reevaluate my situation and see whether any of the options that weren't available to me 2-3 years ago maybe are now an option. My inkling is that there's not, but I certainly need to look into that. In terms of my CCJs, as I said at the very beginning of this epically long, rambly video, all I can do in my CCJs is wait for them to be struck off after 6 years. A couple of them, that will be next year, but a couple of them I will be waiting significantly longer for that to happen. And that's okay. I've accepted that that's going to be what I'm living with for the next few years. I've come to accept that and accept what that means for my finances, especially as I'm more focusing on learning to budget with cash at the moment. It doesn't affect my life to the point where I greatly negative impact, thank goodness. I'm very lucky in that my partner is our homeowner, so I don't have to worry about mortgage implications or anything like that. We bought our car with cash, so it's not a concern at the moment. In terms of the other debt, it's pretty much the same situation. There's no way in my current financial situation that I'm going to be able to afford to clear the vast majority of these debts. Certainly the ones that are thousands and thousands of pounds. I did reach an agreement with Lowell on some of the smaller debts that I had with them. They accepted a 30% offer to clear those smaller debts. So I've actually done really well in clearing the debt that I've been able to. But obviously there is a long way to go. And in all likelihood, unless I win the lottery, I'm never going to pay this debt off. I'm never going to pay it off. So it's a case of waiting the 6 years for those debts to drop off. And that's okay. That's okay. So we reached the end of this ridiculously long, rambly video. I hope you found it interesting. I hope some people have found it helpful. I'm gonna break this video down into chapters so it's easy to skip around and find the bit that potentially you're interested in. I do want to reiterate that none of this is advice. I'm not qualified to give debt advice, but if you have any questions, please leave them below and I will do my best to point you in the right direction of people that are qualified to give you advice. If you are in a similar situation to me, if you have ridiculous amount of debt or just a little bit of debt, whatever your debt situation is, I hope that one takeaway from this video is to be kind to yourself and forgive yourself and try and understand and come to terms with your debt in its place in the greater context of your life. Debt shouldn't be something that controls your entire life. There is no reason, certainly in the UK, for that to be the case. Your focus and energy and emotions are way better placed on other things, and I hope you get to the point in your debt journey where you can accept what's happened and start to move forwards. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Thank you so much. We'll be back in the next couple of days with a cash stuffing video. If you do have any questions or if you want to share your own experience with debt, I think it's really helpful to do that so people that maybe are just starting their journey can see where it leads and that it's not as life limiting as it feels when you're in that deep, dark hole of depression that debt often causes or is even a result of. Thank you so much, guys. Take care. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.